I still remember the exact moment when those words left his lips. "You're just too damaged to love, Kate." His voice was so calm, so clinical, as if he were diagnosing a patient rather than shattering the woman who had given him 3 years of her life. We were standing in our kitchen, well, his kitchen now, the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust particles dancing between us like the fragments of my heart that had just exploded into the air. I didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, I felt something cold and hollow expand inside my chest, spreading outward until my fingertips tingled with numbness. Time seemed to slow as I watched James's face, searching for any hint of remorse or uncertainty. There was none. His hazel eyes, the same eyes I'd gazed into countless nights, the same eyes that had once looked at me with what I thought was love, now regarded me with detached pity. Too damaged to love. The words echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my consciousness, growing louder with each reverberation. The worst part wasn't even that he was leaving me. It was that he had reduced all my struggles, all my healing, all my goddamn resilience to a simple defect, as if I were a flawed product he was returning to the store. "You don't mean that," I whispered, my voice so small I barely recognized it as my own. "After everything we've been through?" James sighed, running his fingers through his perfectly styled dark hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now seemed rehearsed. "Kate, we both know this has been coming. Your insecurities, your trust issues, your panic attacks. I've tried, believe me, but I can't be your therapist and your boyfriend. It's exhausting." Each word was another nail in the coffin of our relationship, each syllable another cut to my already bleeding sense of self. I'd been honest with him from the beginning about my past, the childhood with alcoholic parents, the emotionally abusive relationship in college, the anxiety that sometimes still woke me in the middle of the night. I'd trusted him with my demons, and now he was using them as his excuse to walk away. I thought, my voice cracked and I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. "I thought you loved me despite all that. I thought you said those things made me stronger." A flash of something, guilt perhaps, crossed his face before the mask of calm resolution returned. "I did love parts of you, Kate, but love isn't enough when it's this complicated. You need someone who can handle your damage." "That's not me. I need someone whole." Someone whole, as if I were just fragments of a person, not worth the effort of loving completely. I felt the first tear break free and slide down my cheek as the magnitude of his betrayal hit me. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a judgment on my very worth as a human being capable of giving and receiving love. "There's something else, isn't there?" The question left my lips before I even realized I was thinking it. A woman's intuition, perhaps, or maybe just the familiar pattern of how these things usually went. James had always been ambitious, always reaching for the next rung on his corporate ladder, always concerned with appearances and connections. His momentary hesitation told me everything before he even opened his mouth. "Melissa from work and I have been spending some time together," he admitted, having the decency to at least look at the floor instead of at me. "It's nothing serious yet, but there's potential there. She's easy to be with. Uncomplicated." Uncomplicated. The translation wasn't lost on me, undamaged. I thought of Melissa from his office, tall, blonde, always perfectly put together, daughter of the company's CFO. I'd met her at the Christmas party last year and had felt immediately inadequate in her presence. Now I understood why. "How long?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "It doesn't matter. How long?" "James?" He sighed again. "We've been talking for about 2 months, having lunch. That's all. 2 months. While I had been planning our summer vacation, while I had been making love to him, while I had been foolishly building a future with him in my mind, he had already been laying the groundwork for my replacement. The betrayal burned through the numbness, igniting a fire in my chest that threatened to consume me. "I need you to leave," I said quietly, surprising myself with the calm in my voice. "I'll pack my things tomorrow while you're at work." "Kate, be reasonable. This is my apartment. Your name isn't even on the lease." "Of course." Another detail that now seemed like a red flag I'd willfully ignored. I'd moved in with him a year ago, giving up my own place, but he'd insisted on keeping the lease in his name only because he'd gotten such a good deal on it, and changing the paperwork would complicate things. One more way he'd ensured I remained untethered, easily removable from his life. "Fine," I said, suddenly exhausted. "I'll find somewhere to go tonight. You can stay in the guest room until you find a place." he offered, as if this display of basic human decency somehow absolved him. "I'm not a monster, Kate." I looked at him then, really looked at him. The carefully maintained stubble that never grew too long, the expensive watch his parents had given him for graduation, the posture of someone who had never had to question his place in the world or his worthiness of love. And I realized something that would later become the first ember of my eventual revenge. James wasn't cruel. He was something worse. He was entitled. "No, you're not a monster," I agreed, wiping away my tears with the back of my hand. "You're just a man who thinks he deserves better than damaged goods." His lack of response was confirmation enough. That night, as I lay awake in the guest bedroom surrounded by the framed photos of his family vacations and academic achievements, I replayed our 3 years together through this new lens of betrayal. The times he'd subtly criticized my emotional reactions, the way he'd sigh when I needed reassurance, how he'd pull away when my anxiety peaked, claiming he needed to give me space, when what I needed was support. The picture forming was clear. James had never loved me completely. He had loved the version of me that fit neatly into his life, and he had merely tolerated the parts of me that didn't. I scrolled through my phone contacts, trying to figure out where I could go. Most of our friends were really his friends, successful, polished professionals who had always made me feel slightly out of place with my community college education and social work salary. My best friend Layla was traveling abroad for work. My sister lived 3 states away with her husband and kids. I felt utterly alone, cast adrift by the man who had promised to be my harbor. In the darkness of that guest room, surrounded by evidence of a privileged life I had never quite fit into, I finally allowed myself to break. The sobs came violently, muffled into a pillow so James wouldn't hear from the master bedroom down the hall. I cried for the love I thought I had, for the future that had evaporated in an afternoon, and most of all, for believing once again that I could be enough for someone despite my so-called damage. Morning came with swollen eyes and a hollowness in my chest that made it difficult to breathe. I moved through the motions of existence like a ghost, waiting for James to leave for work so I could pack my life away again. He barely looked at me as he grabbed his travel mug of coffee and briefcase. "I'll be home around 7, he said, his tone professional as if addressing a client. "Will that be enough time for you to sort things out?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without either screaming or crying. "I can help you with boxes if you need." "I'll manage." I cut him off, unable to bear his performative kindness. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at the wall and trying to summon the energy to begin dismantling the life I'd built here. Finally, I called in sick to work and began the mechanical process of packing. Clothes into suitcases, books into boxes I found in the recycling bin, toiletries into bags. With each item I tucked away, I felt pieces of myself going numb. It wasn't until I reached for the framed photo on the nightstand, James and me in Cabo last year, both tanned and smiling, that the emotion returned in a crushing wave. I remembered that trip so vividly. I'd had a panic attack on the small puddle jumper plane, and though James had held my hand, I'd seen the flicker of embarrassment on his face as other passengers stared. Later that night, he'd said something I should have recognized as a warning. "You need to get a handle on this anxiety, Kate. I can't always be there to talk you down." I hurled the frame against the wall, feeling a savage satisfaction as the glass shattered. The sound broke something loose inside me, and suddenly I was tearing through the apartment, looking for evidence of all the ways I had compromised myself to fit into his life. The expensive dress I'd bought for his company gala, even though it cost half my monthly salary. The gourmet cookbooks I'd studied because he'd mentioned his ex was an amazing cook. The anxiety medication I'd finally agreed to take, not because I felt I needed it, but because he said my attacks were becoming too disruptive. Each discovery was another confirmation that I had slowly been erasing myself to become the uncomplicated woman he wanted. And still, it hadn't been enough. I would never be enough for someone who saw my history as damage rather than the source of my strength and empathy. By 3 o'clock, I had packed everything I could fit into my old Honda Civic and made arrangements to crash on a co-worker's couch until I could find a new place. As I did a final sweep of the apartment, my eyes fell on James's prized collection of first edition novels displayed prominently in the living room. A dark thought crossed my mind. How easy it would be to take one, to destroy something he valued the way he had destroyed me. But that wasn't who I was. Despite everything, my damage, my pain, my rage. I wouldn't lower myself to petty theft or destruction. I was better than that. Better than him, perhaps. I left my key on the kitchen counter and walked out without a backward glance. The following weeks passed in a blur of grief and logistical nightmares. Finding an affordable apartment in the city on short notice was nearly impossible. Managing my emotions while maintaining a professional demeanor at work felt like an Olympic sport. Sleeping on my coworker Dana's pull-out couch made every morning start with an aching back and the quiet humiliation of displacement. And through it all, James's words continued to haunt me. Too damaged to love. I'd scroll through social media late at night, masochistically checking for updates. It took only 2 weeks before the first photo appeared. James and Melissa at some rooftop bar, her blonde hair gleaming in the sunset, his arm possessively around her waist. The caption read, "New beginnings." The comments below were filled with congratulations and heart emojis from all the friends who had once smiled to my face. One night, after a particularly grueling day at the social services office where I worked, I found myself sobbing in Dana's bathroom, sitting on the cold tile floor with my back against the tub. "Kate?" Dana's gentle knock on the door startled me. I heard, "Are you okay in there?" I considered lying, saying I was fine, my automatic response after years of trying not to burden others with my emotions. But I was so tired of pretending. "No," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I'm not okay." Dana opened the door slowly and slid down to sit beside me on the floor, not saying anything, just offering her presence. She was a relatively new friend. We'd only worked together for about a year. But in that moment, her silent solidarity meant everything. "He said I was too damaged to love," I finally whispered, the words burning my throat. Like all my struggles just made me defective, unworthy. Dana's arm came around my shoulders, pulling me closer. "That," she said firmly, "is the biggest load of crap I've ever heard." A surprised laugh escaped through my tears. "Seriously, Kate, look at what you do every day. You help people through the worst moments of their lives. You sit with their pain and their trauma and their struggles, and you don't judge them or find them too damaged to deserve compassion. You see their humanity despite everything they've been through." She squeezed my shoulder. How could anyone look at that and see damage instead of strength? Her words were like a tiny light in the darkness I'd been wandering through. Not enough to illuminate the whole path forward, but enough to take the next step. I gave him everything," I said, wiping my face with the heel of my hand. I trusted him with parts of myself I've never shown anyone else. And he just discarded me, like I was broken beyond repair. Dana was quiet for a moment, considering. "You know what I think? I think some people can only love what's easy, what fits their idea of perfect. And when they encounter anything messy or complicated or real, they back away because it would require them to expand their capacity for empathy." She looked at me directly. "That's not your failure, Kate. It's his." Something shifted inside me at her words. A subtle realignment of perspective that would grow stronger in the coming days. What if this wasn't about me being too damaged? What if it was about James being too limited? That night marked the beginning of a different kind of process. Not just grieving what I'd lost, but questioning whether what I'd lost was ever really as valuable as I'd believed. I found a small studio apartment the following week. It was in a less desirable neighborhood and the bathroom sink leaked, but it was mine. On moving day, Dana and 2 other coworkers helped carry my meager possessions up 3 flights of stairs. We ordered pizza and sat on my bare floor drinking cheap wine from plastic cups, and for the first time since James's pronouncement, I felt a genuine moment of joy. "To new beginnings," said Dana, raising her cup in a toast that deliberately echoed James's Instagram caption. "To damaged goods," I countered with a small smile, reclaiming the label that had been thrust upon me. Everyone laughed, and in that laughter, I felt the first tentative unfurling of healing. But healing isn't linear, as I well knew from my work with clients. There were still days when I could barely get out of bed, when the weight of rejection pressed me into the mattress like a physical force. There were nights when I'd draft long texts to James, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, sometimes coldly analytical, only to delete them unsent. There were moments when I'd catch a glimpse of a tall man with dark hair on the street, and my heart would stutter painfully before I realized it wasn't him. And there was the evening, about a month after our breakup, when my phone lit up with his name. "Kate." His voice was slightly slurred when I answered. "Kate, are you there?" "I'm here," I replied, hating the way my pulse quickened at just the sound of him saying my name. "I've been thinking about you," he said, ambient noise in the background suggesting he was at a bar. "About us. I miss you." The old Kate would have melted at these words, would have seen them as vindication and hope. But the woman I was becoming recognized them for what they were, the midnight thoughts of a man whose new relationship might not be going as smoothly as his Instagram suggested. "You miss having someone who put your needs above their own?" I said quietly. "That wasn't healthy, James. For either of us. That's not... You don't understand. Melissa is..." He trailed off, clearly unwilling to admit whatever problems he was having with his perfect, uncomplicated replacement. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my voice. "But it's not me. Not anymore." I ended the call and sat in the darkness of my new apartment, waiting for the familiar flood of grief. Instead, I felt something unexpected, a flicker of power. For the first time since he'd dismissed me as too damaged to love, I had been the one to end the conversation, to set a boundary, to choose myself. It wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the first indication that I wasn't just a victim in this story, that I could be the author of what came next. The following day, I made 2 decisions that would ultimately change the trajectory of my life, and though I didn't know it then, set the stage for the most satisfying revenge I could have imagined. First, I made an appointment with a therapist, not because James had been right about me needing fixing, but because I deserved support in processing what had happened and rebuilding my sense of self-worth. Second, I signed up for a photography class at the community center. Photography had been a passion of mine in college, before life and work and relationships had squeezed out time for hobbies. James had always been dismissive of it, calling it an expensive distraction. Whenever I mentioned wanting to get back into it, now, with no one to judge my choices, I could reclaim this part of myself. The first therapy session was harder than I expected. Sitting across from Dr. Melinda Chen, a woman about 10 years my senior with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, I found myself struggling to articulate exactly what had brought me there. "My boyfriend said I was too damaged to love," I finally blurted out after several false starts. "And the worst part is, I think I believed him." "Doctor?" Chen's expression didn't change, but she leaned forward slightly. "That's a powerful statement someone made about you. Before we unpack that, I'm curious. What does being damaged mean to you, Kate?" The question caught me off guard. I guess it means being broken, having too many issues or baggage, being too much work to love properly. And who defined those terms? Who decided what amount of baggage is acceptable and what crosses the line into damaged? I blinked, considering this. I never really thought about it that way. In my experience, Dr. Chen said gently, people who label others as damaged are often trying to justify their own inability or unwillingness to engage with the full complexity of human emotions. It's rarely actually about the person being labeled. Something loosened in my chest at her words, like a knot being carefully untied. "He moved on so quickly," I whispered, "like I was interchangeable, replaceable." "That speaks volumes about him, not you," she replied. "People who can disconnect that easily from significant relationships often have their own attachment issues they haven't addressed." By the end of that first session, I hadn't miraculously healed, but I had gained something valuable: perspective. The ability to see that James's assessment of me wasn't objective truth, but rather a reflection of his own limitations. The photography class became my sanctuary. Every Thursday evening, I would enter the community center's converted classroom and feel the weight of my everyday concerns lift slightly. Our instructor, Marcus, was a semi-famous local photographer in his 50s with silver-streaked dreadlocks and an infectious enthusiasm for capturing authentic moments. "Photography isn't about perfection," he told us during the first class. "It's about truth, about seeing what's really there, not just what we expect or want to see." I took to the lessons with a hunger that surprised me. Learning about composition, lighting, and the technical aspects of my secondhand DSLR camera gave my restless mind something to focus on besides my pain. But it was Marcus's philosophical approach to photography that really resonated with me. "Great photographers don't just take pictures of beautiful things," he said one evening as we reviewed each other's work. "They reveal the beauty, or the truth, in ordinary things, in overlooked things. Sometimes even in broken things." He was looking at one of my photographs as he said this, a close-up of a cracked sidewalk where a tiny purple flower had somehow pushed through and bloomed. Something about that resilient little plant had called to me, and I'd spent nearly 30 minutes trying to capture it just right. "This is excellent work, Kate," Marcus said, studying my photo. "You've got an eye for finding hope in unlikely places." His words stayed with me long after class ended. Finding hope in unlikely places. Wasn't that what I was trying to do in my own life? Find beauty and possibility in the aftermath of devastation? As weeks turned into months, I established new routines and connections. My tiny apartment began to feel like home, decorated with prints of my own photographs and small treasures from weekend flea market excursions with Dana. My therapy sessions with Dr. Chen helped me recognize patterns in my relationships and develop healthier boundaries. My work at the social services office continued to remind me daily that everyone carries wounds, and those wounds don't determine our value or lovability. I was healing, slowly but surely. But I wasn't yet whole. Because despite all my progress, a part of me still burned with the humiliation of James's dismissal. Still seethed at how easily he had categorized and discarded me. Still wondered if he was happy with Melissa while I was painstakingly rebuilding my life piece by piece. I had muted both of them on social media early on, knowing that constant exposure to their highlight reel would only hinder my recovery. But one evening, about 6 months after our breakup, curiosity got the better of me. After a glass of wine and a particularly frustrating day at work, I found myself typing James's name into the search bar. His profile was full of carefully curated images: James and Melissa at a charity gala, James receiving an award at work, James on vacation in the Bahamas. But as I scrolled through the photographic evidence of his supposedly perfect post-Kate life, I began to notice something, a tightness around his eyes in recent photos. Melissa's smile that never quite reached her eyes. The increasingly effusive captions that protested too much about how blessed and grateful he was. I recognized the signs because I'd lived them myself during the latter part of our relationship. The performance of happiness for public consumption while private dissatisfaction grew. The attempt to convince others, and perhaps yourself, that everything was exactly as it should be. A notification popped up on my phone, a text from Ryan, a fellow photographer from my class who had asked me to coffee after last week's session. We'd been talking more and more during class breaks, discovering shared tastes in music and books. He was different from James in nearly every way, a kindergarten teacher with an easy laugh and zero pretension, who spoke openly about his own struggles with depression without shame or self-consciousness. "Still on for coffee tomorrow?" his text read. "Found a place that apparently makes life-changing cinnamon rolls." I smiled, typing back a confirmation before returning to my scrolling. But something had shifted. The burning in my chest had cooled slightly. James's life, which had once seemed like a rebuke to my own existence, now looked performative, shallow, perhaps even a little desperate. That night, I dreamed of cameras and broken sidewalks and flowers pushing through cracks. I dreamed of James's face as he told me I was too damaged to love, but in the dream I simply laughed and walked away, toward something brighter and more authentic than anything he could offer. I woke with the first genuine sense of peace I'd felt in months, and with the first seedling of an idea for what would eventually become my revenge. Coffee with Ryan the next day stretched into a 3-hour conversation, then dinner the following weekend, then a photography expedition to capture sunrise at the lake. He was easy to be with, genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences without trying to fix or change me. When I finally told him about James, about the too damaged to love verdict that had shattered me, his reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "What an absolute asshole," he said, his usually gentle face hardening with indignation on my behalf. "And what a complete misunderstanding of how love actually works." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious about his perspective. Ryan thought for a moment, absently running his finger around the rim of his coffee cup. "Love isn't about finding someone perfect or undamaged, as if such a person exists. It's about finding someone whose particular collection of experiences and wounds and strengths fits with yours in a way that helps you both grow." He looked up at me, his eyes serious. "Our scars aren't things to be overlooked or tolerated by people who love us. They're part of the map that made us who we are." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, moved by the simple wisdom in his words. That's really beautiful, Ryan." He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry, got a bit philosophical there. Hazard of spending my days trying to explain big concepts to 5-year-olds, I guess." "Don't apologize," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. It's refreshing to hear someone talk about love that way. As Ryan and I grew closer over the following weeks, I continued my other pursuits with renewed energy. My photography improved enough that Marcus suggested I submit some pieces to a local art show. My sessions with Dr. Chen evolved from crisis management to deeper exploration of my goals and values. My work at the social services office felt more meaningful as I brought a stronger, more centered version of myself to my clients. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the best revenge against someone who had deemed me unlovable wouldn't be to prove them wrong by finding love again, though that was happening naturally with Ryan. No, the most satisfying revenge would be to fully embrace and reveal the truth that James had been too limited to see, that my so-called damage was actually the source of my greatest strengths. The idea crystallized one evening during photography class as Marcus reviewed our latest assignments. We had been tasked with creating a series of images around a central theme of our choosing. Many students had selected nature or urban landscapes or portraits. I had chosen visible repairs, a collection of photographs documenting things that had been broken and mended in ways that highlighted rather than concealed the damage. There was the ancient Japanese vase in the museum, its cracks filled with gold according to the art of kintsugi, the vintage chair with one leg replaced by a branch, creating an asymmetrical beauty, the old brick wall where a section had crumbled and been rebuilt with glass bottles embedded in the mortar, creating a stained glass effect when the sun hit it just right. "This is extraordinary work, Kate," Marcus said, lingering over my images longer than he had with other students. "There's something really powerful happening here. You're not just documenting repairs, you're celebrating them," suggesting that the repair itself becomes part of the beauty, part of the story. "That's exactly what I was trying to capture," I said, feeling a surge of validation. The idea that something broken and mended can be more interesting, more authentic, more valuable than something that was never damaged at all. Marcus nodded slowly. "You know, there's a gallery downtown doing a show next month on transformed identities. I think your work would be perfect for it. Would you consider submitting this series?" The old Kate would have immediately demurred, insisted she wasn't ready for public exposure, worried about potential criticism or rejection. But the woman I was becoming, the one who understood that her wounds were part of her strength, smiled and said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." That night, I told Ryan about the gallery opportunity over dinner at my apartment. His face lit up with pride and excitement for me. "Kate, that's amazing. Your work deserves to be seen." "I'm nervous," I admitted, refilling our wine glasses. "But also, ready, I think. Ready to put myself out there again." Ryan's expression softened as he reached across the table for my hand. "Can I tell you something? Something I noticed about you right from the first day of class?" I nodded, curious. "You have this incredible ability to see beauty in broken things. In the photos you take, yes, but also in the way you talk about your clients at work, or even strangers you observe. You don't look away from damage or pain, you look directly at it with such compassion." His thumb traced circles on my palm as he spoke. "I think that's because you've had to learn to look at your own pain that way. And that's not damage, Kate. That's a gift." Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness but from the profound relief of being truly seen. I leaned across the table and kissed him, a soft, brief meeting of lips that carried the weight of gratitude and growing affection. "Thank you," I whispered against his mouth, "for seeing me." As I prepared my photography series for the gallery submission, I found myself thinking more and more about James and his dismissal of me. Not with the raw pain of before, but with a growing sense of clarity and purpose. His words, "too damaged to love," had once been a sentence passed on my worth. Now they were becoming the title of a story I was rewriting on my own terms. I decided to add one final image to my Visible Repairs series. It would be a self-portrait, but not a conventional one. I would photograph my own reflection in a broken mirror that I had carefully reassembled, the cracks forming a web that didn't obscure my face but rather emphasized its complexity and resilience. The process of creating this image was therapeutic in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I arranged the broken pieces, carefully gluing them back together while intentionally preserving the evidence of breakage, I thought about all the ways I had been putting myself back together over these months. Not to appear unbroken, but to honor the breaking as part of my story. The resulting photograph was striking, my face visible through a network of cracks that caught the light and created prism effects, turning simple reflection into something multifaceted and unexpectedly beautiful. I titled it Self-Portrait with Honorable Scars. When I showed it to Ryan, he was quiet for a long moment before saying, "This is the one, Kate. This is the image that ties the whole series together." I knew he was right. And I knew something else too. This photograph, this series, would be the first step in my revenge against James. Not a revenge of harm or humiliation, but a revenge of truth, of reclamation, of transformation. The gallery accepted my submission with enthusiasm, and as the exhibition date approached, my anticipation grew. I hadn't spoken to or seen James in nearly 8 months by this point, but through mutual acquaintances, I knew he was still with Melissa, still climbing the corporate ladder, still projecting the image of success he had always valued so highly. I also knew, through those same acquaintances, that his company had recently become a sponsor of the very gallery where my work would be displayed. That his attendance at the opening night was not just possible but likely. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. I didn't tell Ryan about this potential encounter. I didn't want to color the evening with anticipation of drama or confrontation. This night would be about my work, my journey, my transformation, not about James and his reaction to it. The evening of the gallery opening arrived with a flurry of nervous energy. I wore a deep blue dress that made me feel confident and strong, and silver earrings that Ryan had given me to match the light in your eyes, as he'd said. My hair, which I'd cut into a shorter, more modern style since the breakup, fell in soft waves around my face. As we entered the gallery, Ryan squeezed my hand. "Ready to show the world your beautiful vision?" I took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The gallery was already buzzing with attendees when we arrived. My work was displayed in a corner section along with 3 other photographers exploring similar themes of transformation. I felt a surge of pride seeing my images professionally mounted and lit, my artist's statement displayed prominently beside them. Several people were already studying my photographs, glasses of wine in hand, engaged in thoughtful discussion about what they were seeing. Ryan and I made our way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversations about the work. I was explaining the kintsugi concept to an interested couple when I felt it, that unmistakable sensation of being watched. The prickle on the back of my neck that told me a significant moment was approaching. I turned and there he was, James, standing about 15 feet away, staring at my self-portrait with an unreadable expression. Melissa was beside him, stunning in a red dress, saying something to another gallery patron, but James wasn't listening to her. He was transfixed by my photograph, by my face fractured and reassembled into something stronger than before. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the moment of recognition flash across his features. Surprise, confusion, something else I couldn't quite identify. I expected to feel anxiety or anger or vindication. Instead, I felt remarkably calm, centered. This man who had once held such power over my sense of self now seemed smaller somehow, less significant. I excused myself from the conversation I'd been having and touched Ryan's arm. "I'll be right back," I murmured, and he nodded, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding across the room. As I approached James, I watched his expression cycle through several emotions: discomfort, defensive posturing, an attempt at casual nonchalance. "Kate," he said when I reached him, his voice carrying that familiar note of controlled surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "It's my exhibition," I replied simply, gesturing to the placard with my name. "Or part of it, at least." His eyes widened slightly as he glanced between me and the photographs. "These are yours? They're impressive." "Thank you," I said, noticing how he shifted his weight from one foot to another, a tell I recognized from our relationship, a sign he was feeling wrong-footed. "You look well," he offered, his gaze taking in my appearance with an evaluative quality that once would have made me shrink inside myself, wondering if I measured up. Now it merely registered as a habit of his, no more significant than the way he always checked his watch when feeling uncomfortable. "I am well," I confirmed. "Better than well, actually. I'm happy." Before he could respond, Melissa appeared at his side, her smile faltering slightly when she saw me. "Oh, Kate, right? James's friend from before?" "Friend," a careful erasure of what we had been to each other. I smiled, extending my hand to her. "Yes, that's me. Enjoying the exhibition?" "It's lovely," she said automatically, then gestured to my photographs. "Are these yours?" "They're so intense." "That's one word for them," I agreed. I've been exploring the concept of visible repairs, the idea that things that have been broken and mended carry a special kind of beauty, that the scars themselves become part of the value. James stiffened beside her, and I knew he was remembering his words to me in that sunlit kitchen so many months ago, too damaged to love. I met his eyes directly, not with challenge or accusation, but with the steady gaze of someone who knows her own worth. It's been quite a healing journey, I continued, my voice even. Creating this series helped me realize that what some people might call damage is actually just part of being authentically human, and the right people will see that humanity as beautiful, not broken. That's a powerful perspective, Melissa said, and I caught something in her tone, a wistfulness perhaps, or a recognition that resonated with her own hidden struggles. I wondered briefly what complications James might have already discovered in her that he'd found too difficult to embrace. "Kate, there you are." Ryan's voice came from behind me as he approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Sorry to interrupt, but they're about to do the artist introductions." I introduced Ryan to James and Melissa, watching as James assessed this man who now held my hand so naturally, so comfortably. I saw the moment James registered the ease between us, the genuine connection that required no performance or perfectionism. The comparison was inevitable, and I could see it working in his mind, rearranging his understanding of what had happened between us. "We should let you get back to your big moment," James said finally, a new tension in his jaw. "Congratulations on the exhibition." "It's thought-provoking." "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It was nice seeing you both." As Ryan and I walked away, he leaned close to my ear. "Ex?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I confirmed. "The one who thought I was too damaged to love." Ryan glanced back over his shoulder at James, who was still watching us, then turned to me with a smile that warmed me from the inside out. "His loss," he said simply. "My incredible gain." The gallery director was calling for attention, preparing to introduce the featured artists. But before I stepped forward to be recognized, I allowed myself one last look at James. He was standing slightly apart from Melissa now, his expression troubled, his eyes still fixed on my self-portrait, on the image of a woman who had taken her brokenness and transformed it into art, into strength, into a kind of beauty he had been too limited to recognize when he had the chance. In that moment, I realized something profound. True revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about flourishing so completely in their absence that they're forced to question everything they thought they knew about you and about themselves. As I stepped forward to be introduced as one of the featured artists, accepting the polite applause with a gracious smile, I felt the last pieces of my old pain falling away. James had called me too damaged to love, and in doing so, he had inadvertently set me on a path to discovering just how worthy of love I truly was. Scars, complications, and all. The real revenge, I understood now, wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in thanking him for being wrong, for giving me the push I needed to rebuild myself not according to someone else's specifications, but according to my own truth. And that truth was beautiful, complex, and infinitely lovable, not despite the damage, but because of how I had transformed it. The exhibition was a success beyond my expectations. 2 of my photographs sold that night, including the self-portrait, purchased by an art collector who told me it spoke to the universal experience of being broken open and finding new strength in the reassembly. Several local blogs covered the event, and one even featured my work prominently in their write-up, calling it a stunning visual meditation on resilience and authentic beauty. But the most significant outcome of that evening wasn't professional recognition or sales. It was the final release of James's power over my narrative. Seeing him there, confronted with the evidence of my growth and transformation, had closed a chapter I hadn't even realized was still partially open. As Ryan and I celebrated later that night over late-night pancakes at my favorite diner, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not just since the breakup, but perhaps even during the relationship itself, when I had been constantly managing my damage to make myself more acceptable, more lovable. "I'm really proud of you," Ryan said, reaching across the table to wipe a spot of syrup from the corner of my mouth. The casual intimacy of the gesture made my heart swell. Not just for the show, but for how you handled seeing him tonight. You were so centered, so completely yourself. I smiled, thinking about how different this man was from James, how Ryan saw my complexity as intriguing rather than inconvenient, how he never made me feel like I needed to be less in order to be loved. I think that's the first time I've faced him without feeling diminished somehow, I admitted, without feeling like I had to prove something or defend myself. Because you don't, Ryan said simply. You never did. Over the following months, my life continued to expand in ways I could never have imagined during those dark days after James's rejection. My photography gained more recognition, leading to a small solo exhibition at a cafe near the university. My work at the social services office felt more fulfilling as I brought my authentic self, wounds, wisdom, and all, to my interactions with clients. My relationship with Ryan deepened into something solid and nurturing, built on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's full humanity. I still had anxiety sometimes. I still carried the scars of my past experiences. I still occasionally needed reassurance or struggled with old insecurities. But these aspects of myself no longer felt like flaws to be hidden or overcome. They were simply parts of the complex, beautiful whole that was me. And then, about a year after that first gallery showing, I received a text message from a number I hadn't deleted but hadn't used in all that time. "Can we meet for coffee? There's something I need to say to you. James." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to identify what I was feeling. Not anxiety, not anger, not even curiosity really. Just a mild surprise that he would reach out after all this time. I showed the text to Ryan, who was making dinner in my kitchen. Our kitchen, really, since he spent most nights there now. "Are you going to go?" he asked, his tone neutral, respectful of whatever decision I might make. I considered the question carefully. A year ago, I might have jumped at the chance, eager for closure or validation or some final emotional resolution. But now, I don't think I need to, I said finally. Whatever he wants to say, it doesn't change anything for me. I've already found my closure. Ryan nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That's my girl, always making the healthiest choice. I laughed, wrapping my arms around him from behind as he stirred the pasta sauce. Not always. But I'm getting better at it. I did reply to James's text, but not with the answer he was probably expecting. I appreciate you reaching out, but I don't think we need to meet. I'm in a good place now and have found the healing I needed. I wish you well on your journey. His response came quickly. I understand. I just wanted to apologize for what I said that day, about you being too damaged. I was wrong and I've regretted those words ever since. You deserved better. I felt a momentary softening, a flash of appreciation for his acknowledgement, but it was followed by the calm certainty that this apology, while welcomed, wasn't necessary for my happiness or well-being anymore. Thank you for saying that, I texted back. Apology accepted. And that was it. No dramatic confrontation, no tearful reunion, no extended processing of past hurts. Just a simple exchange that acknowledged what had happened and closed the door gently but firmly on that chapter of my life. Later that week, scrolling through social media, I noticed that James's relationship status had changed. He and Melissa were no longer together. There were no dramatic posts about it, no cryptic quotes about betrayal or loss, just the quiet removal of "in a relationship" and the disappearance of their couple photos. I felt a brief pang of empathy for both of them, knowing how painful such endings could be. But I also recognized that their story wasn't mine to analyze or interpret. Whatever had happened between them was their journey, not a validation or vindication of mine. 6 months later, Ryan proposed during a sunrise photography expedition at the lake where we'd had one of our first dates. He'd collaborated with Marcus to set up the perfect scene, a ring box nestled among carefully arranged broken seashells that had been mended with gold in the kintsugi tradition, positioned so the rising sun illuminated the gold repairs. "Because I love every part of you," he said as he knelt before me, the camera forgotten in my hands. "Every experience that shaped you, every crack that healed stronger, every beautiful imperfection. Will you marry me, Kate?" Through tears of joy, I said yes. And as he slipped the ring onto my finger, a vintage piece with an imperfect but captivating stone, I thought about how far I'd come from that devastating day in James's kitchen. How completely my understanding of love and worthiness had transformed. We were married the following spring in a ceremony that celebrated authenticity above perfection. My bouquet included wildflowers with slightly wilted edges alongside pristine roses. My dress had been vintage, lovingly restored with visible stitching that added character rather than detracting from its beauty. Our vows acknowledged that we were bringing our whole selves to this union, not idealized versions, but real human beings with histories and scars and ongoing growth. When Dana caught the bouquet and Marcus caught her eye from across the reception, I felt a surge of joy at the possibility of another love story beginning, one built on the understanding that our complications are not obstacles to love, but invitations to deeper connection. As Ryan and I swayed together during our first dance, I whispered in his ear, "Thank you for loving all of me." He pulled back slightly to look into my eyes, his own filled with such genuine adoration that it still sometimes took my breath away. "Loving all of you is the easiest thing I've ever done," he said, "and the most rewarding." Over the reception dinner, surrounded by friends and family who had supported my journey, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led me here. If James hadn't spoken those devastating words, "too damaged to love," would I have found the courage to rebuild myself so completely? Would I have discovered my artistic voice through photography? Would I have met Ryan and recognized in him the capacity for the kind of love I truly deserved? There was no way to know for certain, but what I did know was that sometimes the most painful endings can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. Sometimes being broken open is exactly what we need to let in more light. The final piece of what I now recognized as my perfect revenge came 6 months after our wedding. Ryan and I were hosting a housewarming party for the small but charming home we'd purchased together. Our guests included colleagues, friends, family, and several people from the art world who had supported my growing photography career. I was in the kitchen refilling a tray of appetizers when Dana approached, a strange expression on her face. "Kate," she said quietly, "don't freak out, but James just walked in with Trisha from the gallery committee. I think they might be dating." I looked past her to the living room where, indeed, James stood somewhat awkwardly near the door, a bottle of wine in hand. He looked different, slightly thinner, his usually perfect hair a bit longer and less controlled. Beside him was Trisha, a passionate art advocate I'd worked with on several exhibitions over the past year. "Did you invite him?" Dana asked, her protective instinct evident in her tone. "No," I said, genuinely surprised. "Trisha must have brought him as her +1. I didn't even know they knew each other." Dana watched me carefully. "Are you okay? Do you want Ryan to ask them to leave?" I considered how I felt, searching for any trace of the old pain or anxiety that James's presence might once have triggered. There was none. Just a mild curiosity and, surprisingly, a genuine hope that he had found someone who appreciated his good qualities while helping him grow beyond his limitations. "I'm fine," I assured her. "Really? This is actually perfect." And it was. Because as I walked into my living room, my beautiful home filled with people who loved the authentic me, my photography prominently displayed on the walls, my husband's arm slipping naturally around my waist as I approached, I realized that this moment was the culmination of the revenge I had never consciously planned, but had achieved nonetheless. James looked up as I approached, his expression a complex mixture of apprehension and something like wonder. "Kate," he said, extending the wine, "I hope it's okay that I came." "Trisha said it would be, but if it's uncomfortable..." "It's absolutely okay," I said, taking the bottle with a genuine smile. "Welcome to our home. It's good to see you." And it was good. Not because I took pleasure in any discomfort he might feel, but because standing before him as the woman I had become was the most complete refutation possible of his assessment that I was too damaged to love. Here I was, loved completely, successful in my career, surrounded by community, creating art from my experiences, living authentically with all my complexities and contradictions embraced rather than hidden. As Ryan and I gave James and Trisha a tour of our home, pointing out favorite features and sharing stories of our renovation adventures, I observed how James watched us together, the easy affection, the inside jokes, the natural rhythm of two people who accepted each other fully. I saw recognition dawn in his eyes, the understanding that what Ryan and I shared was something deeper and more authentic than what he and I had ever achieved. Later, as guests mingled in the backyard under strings of lights, James found me alone for a moment by the drink table. "You seem really happy, Kate," he said quietly. "It suits you." "I am happy," I confirmed, meeting his gaze directly. "Happier than I ever thought possible when you said those words to me that day." He flinched slightly but nodded. "I've wanted to apologize properly for that. It was cruel and completely wrong." He looked down at his glass. "The truth is, I was the damaged one. Too afraid of real intimacy? Too concerned with appearances? Too limited in my understanding of what love actually requires? I hadn't expected this level of self-awareness from him, and it touched me. We all have our damage, James, I said gently. The question is whether we let it close us off or open us up. He looked at me with new respect in his eyes. When did you get so wise? I laughed softly. Probably around the time I started believing that my so-called damage wasn't a defect, but a doorway to deeper connection. I nodded toward Trisha, who was engaged in animated conversation with Marcus across the yard. Trisha's a wonderful person, very authentic. I hope things work out for you two. We're taking it slow, he said, a humility in his voice I'd rarely heard during our relationship. I'm learning a lot from her, about myself, about what matters. That's all any of us can do, I said. Keep learning, keep growing. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, James and Trisha among them, Ryan found me washing dishes in the kitchen. He slipped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. You okay? He murmured, pressing a kiss to my neck. That must have been strange having him here. I turned in his arms, studying the face I woke up to every morning. Kind eyes, laugh lines, the small scar above his eyebrow from a childhood accident. A face I loved, not despite its imperfections, but because they were part of the man who had shown me what real love looked like. You know what's strange? I said, wrapping my arms around his neck. It wasn't strange at all. Seeing him just confirmed what I already knew. Which is, I smiled, feeling the absolute truth of my next words. That being too damaged to love was never my reality. It was just his excuse for not being brave enough to love completely. I pressed my forehead to his. And that the greatest revenge isn't making someone miserable. It's becoming so authentically happy that they're forced to question everything they thought they knew about love. Ryan kissed me then, a kiss that contained all the acceptance and appreciation and adoration that I had once thought might be beyond my reach. And in that kiss was the final confirmation of what I now understood with absolute clarity. There is no such thing as being too damaged to love. There are only people brave enough to love the whole of another person, complications, history, scars and all, and people who haven't yet learned how. James had been wrong about me. And that wrongness had set me free to find the right kind of love, the kind that sees damage not as a deterrent, but as evidence of a life fully lived, of battles survived, of the capacity to heal and grow stronger at the broken places. That night, as Ryan and I lay in bed in our new home, I thought about the strange, painful, beautiful journey that had led me here, about how words meant to diminish me had instead launched me toward my most authentic self. About how rejection had ultimately guided me to deeper connection. What are you thinking about? Ryan asked sleepily, his hand finding mine in the darkness. Just that sometimes the things that hurt us most can lead us exactly where we need to go, I replied, squeezing his fingers. If they don't break us forever, they break us open. He pulled me closer, his heartbeat steady against my back. And you, my love, are beautifully, perfectly, wonderfully open. As I drifted toward sleep in the arms of a man who loved my whole self, damage and all, I sent a silent thought of gratitude into the universe. Not just for Ryan and our life together, not just for the friends and art and work that fulfilled me, but also, strangely enough, for James and those devastating words that had once shattered me. Because sometimes, the most exquisite revenge is simply proving someone wrong by becoming more completely yourself than you ever could have been with them. And in that becoming, in that growth and healing and transformation, you discover that the greatest love story isn't the one you have with someone else. It's the one you have with yourself. In the year that followed our housewarming party, life settled into a rhythm of creative fulfillment and domestic contentment that sometimes made me pause and wonder, had it really been only 2 years since I'd stood in James's kitchen, devastated by his pronouncement that I was too damaged to love? The woman I was then, shattered, doubting her worth, convinced that her emotional complexities made her unlovable, would hardly recognize the woman I had become. My photography career had blossomed beyond my most optimistic expectations. What had started as a healing practice in that community center class had evolved into a legitimate artistic pursuit, with regular exhibitions in local galleries and even a feature in a regional arts magazine that called my work a powerful exploration of beauty and brokenness. I had converted our spare bedroom into a studio where I spent hours developing new techniques for my visible repairs. series, experimenting with different mediums and materials, Ryan's unwavering support continued to be the foundation that made my growth possible. He'd come home from his kindergarten classroom with stories of his 5-year-olds that made me laugh until my sides hurt, then listen with genuine interest as I described my latest artistic breakthrough or frustration. We had settled into the kind of partnership I had once thought existed only in idealized fiction, one where both people could be fully themselves, vulnerabilities and all, without fear of judgment or abandonment. I'm thinking of proposing a workshop series at the community center. I told Ryan one evening as we prepared dinner together, the easy domesticity of chopping vegetables side by side still feeling like a small miracle. For people who've experienced trauma or significant loss, using photography as a way to process and transform painful experiences. Ryan looked up from the onions he was dicing. "That sounds perfect for you." His eyes, always so expressive, shone with pride. "You'd be amazing at that." "You think so?" I asked, still occasionally needing reassurance despite how far I'd come. "I mean, I'm not a therapist or anything?" "No, but you're living proof of the healing power of creative expression," he said, setting down his knife to face me fully. "And you have such natural empathy, Kate. You know how to create space for people to be vulnerable." His confidence in me was like a warm current running beneath my life, buoying me through moments of uncertainty. It was so different from what I'd had with James, where I'd always felt I was one emotional misstep away from being too much, too needy, too damaged. I submitted my proposal the following week, and to my delight, the community center's director approved it immediately. "We've been wanting to expand our therapeutic arts programming," she explained. "And your personal journey combined with your artistic credentials makes you uniquely qualified to lead this." The first workshop was scheduled for early spring. As I prepared the curriculum, I found myself reflecting on my own path from brokenness to wholeness, trying to distill the elements that had been most healing for me. Photography had given me a way to externalize my pain, to transform it into something with meaning and beauty. Could I help others find that same transformation? Meanwhile, my relationship with Ryan continued to deepen in ways that still sometimes took me by surprise. One rainy Sunday afternoon, as we lazed on the couch reading, he looked up from his book with an expression that immediately made my heart beat faster. "What?" I asked, recognizing the thoughtful furrow between his brows that usually preceded something significant. "I was just thinking," he began, setting his book aside, "about family." "Family?" I echoed, suddenly aware of the weight this conversation might carry. "Yeah," he reached for my hand. "I know we've talked about it in general terms before, but I've been thinking more concretely lately about having kids. With you." The word kids hung in the air between us, charged with possibility and, for me, a faint undercurrent of fear. Not because I didn't want children with Ryan. I did, with a longing that sometimes caught me off guard, but because the idea of motherhood triggered all my old insecurities about my capacity to love and be loved. "What if—" I started, then stopped, swallowing hard. "What if what?" Ryan prompted gently, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "What if I'm not good at it?" The words came out in a rush. "What if all my damage makes me a terrible mother?" There it was, James's words still haunting me in this most vulnerable moment. Damage. The label I'd worked so hard to reframe, to accept as part of my strength rather than a defect. Yet here it was again, surfacing at the prospect of creating a new life, a new love. Ryan's expression softened, but not with pity, with understanding. "First of all," he said, "the fact that you're even asking that question already makes you better prepared than half the parents out there." He shifted closer to me on the couch. "But more importantly, Kate, do you know what I see when I imagine you as a mother?" I shook my head, my throat tight with emotion. "I see someone who will teach our child that it's okay to feel deeply, that healing is possible after hurt, that imperfection is part of being human." His voice grew more passionate as he continued. "I see someone who will love fiercely and protect bravely because she knows what it means to be vulnerable. Someone who will create a home where there's no such thing as too damaged to love, only people doing their best to be authentic with each other." Tears spilled down my cheeks as his words penetrated the last corners of doubt in my heart. This was why I loved this man, for his ability to see the gifts in my wounds, the strength in my struggles. "So what do you think?" he asked, wiping a tear from my cheek. "Is it something you want to start trying for?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes," I finally managed. "With you, yes. That night, as we made love with a new dimension of possibility between us, I felt a profound sense of healing come full circle. My body, which had once been the vessel of so much pain and shame, could now potentially become the source of new life. My heart, once deemed too damaged for love, could expand to include a child. The journey from James's kitchen to this moment of profound intimacy and hope seemed both impossibly long and surprisingly direct, as if every step, even the painful ones, had been leading me here all along. 2 weeks before my first workshop was scheduled to begin, I received an unexpected email that sent a jolt of anxiety through my carefully constructed piece. Dear Miss Bennett, it began formally, though the sender was someone who had once known the feel of my body against his, the sound of my breathing in sleep. I hope this message finds you well. I'm reaching out in my capacity as the new Director of Community Relations at Meridian Corp. Our company is looking to sponsor a series of arts initiatives focused on healing and community building, and your name came up in our research as someone doing innovative work in this area. I would be interested in discussing the possibility of Meridian sponsoring your upcoming workshop series at the community center. We could provide additional funding for materials, marketing, and possibly even a stipend for you as the facilitator. Would you be available to meet for coffee next week to discuss this opportunity? Regards, James Harrington, Director of Community Relations, Meridian Corporation. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the message as if it might transform into something less complicated on the third or fourth pass. James, offering to sponsor my workshops, wanting to meet for coffee. My first instinct was to delete the email and pretend I'd never received it. My life was good, better than good. I was happily married, professionally fulfilled, actively trying to start a family. Why introduce this complication? But as my initial reaction faded, I found myself considering the proposal more objectively. The community center operated on a shoestring budget, and additional funding would allow me to provide better materials for participants, perhaps even scholarships for those who couldn't afford the modest registration fee. Was I really going to deny these resources to people who could benefit from them just to avoid an uncomfortable interaction with my ex? I forwarded the email to Ryan with a simple message. What do you think about this? His response came quickly. That's unexpected. How do you feel about it? I appreciated that he didn't immediately tell me what to do or react with jealousy. It was so characteristic of the respect that defined our relationship. Conflicted, I wrote back honestly. The money would help the program, but it's James, he completed when he called me a few minutes later. And that complicates things. Yeah, I sighed, leaning back in my office chair. It feels weird, you know. Like, is this genuinely professional, or is there some other agenda? What does your gut tell you? Ryan asked. I considered the question carefully. Honestly, I think it probably is mostly professional. From what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, he's been trying to, grow or something since we last saw him. And this new position in community relations would make sponsoring arts programs a legitimate part of his job. But, Ryan prompted, hearing the hesitation in my voice, but there's always going to be personal history there, I admitted. And I'm not sure if meeting with him one-on-one is the best idea. What if I came with you? Ryan suggested. Not to be possessive or anything, but just as support? We could meet somewhere public, keep it strictly business. His suggestion eased some of the tension I was feeling. That might work, I said. But are you sure you're comfortable with it? Kate, he said, his voice warm through the phone. I trust you completely. And I'm secure enough in what we have that a coffee meeting with your ex doesn't threaten me. I just want to make sure you feel safe and supported. Once again, I was struck by the contrast between my past and present relationships. James had often displayed subtle jealousy that I'd mistaken for passion, making comments about male colleagues or friends that left me constantly reassuring him. Ryan's confidence, in himself, in me, in us, created a foundation of security I'd never experienced before. I love you, I said simply. And yes, I'd appreciate having you there. I replied to James's email with professional cordiality, accepting the meeting but mentioning that my husband would be joining us. His response was prompt and equally professional, with no comment on Ryan's inclusion. The day of the meeting, I found myself spending more time than usual deciding what to wear, a fact that annoyed me as soon as I recognized it. Why did I care how I looked for this meeting? It wasn't vanity exactly, but rather a desire to present myself as the composed, successful woman I had become. I finally settled on a simple but elegant blouse paired with jeans and my favorite boots, an outfit that said creative professional rather than trying too hard. Ryan and I arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early, choosing a table near the window where the natural light was good. I felt a flutter of nerves as I spotted James approaching from across the street, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "You okay?" Ryan asked quietly, noticing my tension. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Just strange, you know, even after all this time." He squeezed my hand just as James entered the cafe, scanning the room before his eyes landed on us. He looked different than he had at our housewarming party, more polished again, back to the immaculate presentation I remembered from our relationship. But there was something else too, a slight softening around the eyes perhaps, a less rigid set to his shoulders. "Kate?" He greeted me with a professional smile, then extended his hand to Ryan. "And Ryan, thank you both for meeting with me." We exchanged pleasantries as James ordered his coffee, still an Americano with 1 sugar I noticed, some habits apparently unchanged, and then got down to business. "So, as I mentioned in my email," James began, "Meridian is looking to expand our community engagement through arts sponsorship. Your workshop series aligns perfectly with our new focus on mental health and healing initiatives." He spoke with genuine enthusiasm about the corporation's commitment to giving back to the community, explaining that they could offer a grant that would cover all materials, provide a proper stipend for me, and even fund a small exhibition of work created by workshop participants at the end of the series. As he talked, I found myself watching him with a strange sense of detachment, as if observing a character in a film rather than someone who had once been the center of my world. This man had held such power over my sense of self-worth, had reduced me to a single crushing label, too damaged to love. Now he sat across from me, respectfully outlining a business proposal, while beside me sat the man who had shown me how false that label had been. "The proposal sounds generous," I said when he finished his presentation. "But I'm curious about something, James." "Of course," he replied, his posture straightening slightly. "Of all the arts programs in the city, why approach me specifically? Meridian could sponsor established programs with much higher visibility." A flicker of discomfort crossed his features before he composed himself. "That's a fair question," he acknowledged. "The professional answer is that your focus on transformation through creative expression aligns perfectly with our corporate values of growth and resilience." He paused, glancing at Ryan before continuing. "The more personal answer is that I've seen your work, Kate. Not just your photography, but the impact you've had on people who've participated in your previous classes. Trisha speaks very highly of your ability to create safe spaces for vulnerability and growth." "Ah, Trisha. I'd almost forgotten his connection to the art world through her." "Are you two still together?" I asked, the question escaping before I could consider its appropriateness in this ostensibly professional meeting. James shook his head. "No, we broke up about 6 months ago. But we've remained friends, and she's actually on Meridian's Arts Advisory Committee now." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. "Don't be," he replied with a small smile that held more self-awareness than I would have expected from the James I'd known. "It was the right decision for both of us. Trisha helped me understand some important things about myself, but ultimately we wanted different futures." Ryan, who had been quietly observant throughout the exchange, spoke up. "The sponsorship sounds like a great opportunity for the workshop participants. What kind of involvement would Meridian expect to have in the actual programming?" It was a good question, getting us back to business while addressing a potential concern. James turned his attention to Ryan with what appeared to be genuine respect. "That's an important point," he said. "We're very clear that we want to provide resources without interfering with creative direction. We'd ask for acknowledgement in materials and the right to use non-identifying photos from the exhibition in our corporate social responsibility reports, but the content and approach would remain entirely under Kate's control." As the meeting continued, I found myself relaxing into the unexpected ease of this interaction. There was no underlying tension, no sense that James was using this professional opportunity for personal agenda. If anything, he seemed genuinely committed to supporting the kind of work that might have helped him process his own issues around intimacy and vulnerability, the very issues that had made him label me as too damaged, when in fact, as I now understood, he had been the one afraid of real emotional depth. By the time we wrapped up the discussion, I had decided to accept the sponsorship. It would provide valuable resources for people who could genuinely benefit from the healing power of creative expression, and I was secure enough in myself and my marriage to maintain a professional connection with James. As we stood to leave, James hesitated, then said, "There's something else I'd like to say, if that's okay." Ryan and I exchanged a glance, and he gave me a subtle nod, present but giving me space to handle whatever was coming. "Of course," I said, curious. "I want you to know that I recommended your program to Meridian with completely professional intentions," James began, "but I'd be dishonest if I didn't acknowledge that seeing you again, seeing the life and work you've created." He paused, searching for words. "It's been educational for me." "Educational?" I repeated, not sure what to make of this. "Yes," he said, his gaze direct now. "Seeing you so clearly thriving in your career, your marriage, your whole life, it's forced me to confront how wrong I was. Not just about you being too damaged, but about my whole understanding of what love and connection actually require." I felt Ryan's hand come to rest lightly at the small of my back, not possessive but supportive, as James continued. "I've been in therapy for the past year," he said, the admission clearly costing him something in terms of his carefully maintained image. "Working on my own, issues with intimacy and vulnerability. And I realized that what I called your damage was really just your capacity for emotional honesty, something I wasn't equipped to handle then." The cafe continued its normal bustle around us, but in our small bubble of conversation, time seemed to slow as I absorbed his words. This was, in its way, a more complete vindication than I could have ever planned or expected. James not only acknowledging his mistake, but having done the work to understand its root causes. "Thank you for telling me that," I said finally. "It means something to hear it." "I don't expect it to change anything," he added quickly. "You've clearly found where you belong." His glance included Ryan in this assessment. "I just wanted you to know that your so-called damage wasn't the problem. My inability to value it was." As Ryan and I walked back to our car after the meeting, I felt a strange lightness, as if some final weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. "You okay?" Ryan asked as we buckled our seatbelts. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find it was completely true. "Better than okay, actually." That was unexpectedly healing. "He's done some growing," Ryan observed, no jealousy or insecurity in his assessment. That couldn't have been easy for him to admit. "No," I agreed. The old James would have rather died than admit to being in therapy, let alone being wrong about something so fundamental. Ryan started the car but turned to me before pulling away from the curb. "You know what I was thinking in there?" "What's that?" His eyes, warm and certain, held mine. "That I'm the luckiest man alive, because someone else couldn't see the treasure that was right in front of him." And there it was, the difference that defined my life now. Where James had seen damage, Ryan saw treasure. Where one man had found me too much, another found me exactly enough. I leaned across the console and kissed him, a surge of gratitude and love making my eyes sting with tears. "Take me home," I whispered against his lips. "I think we have some baby-making to attempt." His laugh, warm and delighted, filled the car as we pulled into traffic, heading home to the life we were building together, a life that had room for all of me, scars and complexities included. The workshop series began 2 weeks later, with Meridian's sponsorship allowing me to provide high-quality materials and even small scholarships for participants who couldn't afford the fee. I had structured the 8-week program as a journey from acknowledging pain through creative expression to transforming that pain into something meaningful, mirroring my own path from brokenness to wholeness. The first session was nerve-wracking. Despite my experience teaching regular photography classes, this venture into art as healing felt more vulnerable, more personal. I had planned to begin by sharing a bit of my own story, not the details about James specifically, but the general journey from believing myself too damaged for love to discovering that my wounds were actually pathways to deeper connection. 12 participants gathered in the community center's art room that first evening, 8 women and 4 men ranging in age from early 20s to late 60s. I had deliberately kept the group small to allow for meaningful interaction and support. As they settled into chairs arranged in a circle, I took a deep breath and began. "Welcome to Visible Repair's Healing Through Photography," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm Kate Bennett, and I'll be guiding you through this 8-week journey." I gestured to the walls where I had hung several pieces from my own collection: the broken mirror self-portrait, the cracked sidewalk with the flower, a recent piece showing hands holding fragments of a ceramic bowl, gold lines beginning to connect the pieces. My own journey with photography began as a way to make sense of a painful period in my life, I continued. I had been told by someone I trusted that I was too damaged to love, that my emotional complexities, my past wounds, my needs and vulnerabilities made me unworthy of deep connection. I saw recognition flicker across several faces, the universal experience of being judged and found wanting by someone whose opinion mattered to you. Photography became my way of challenging that narrative, I explained, of exploring the idea that our breaks and repairs aren't flaws to be hidden, but unique aspects of our beauty and strength. As I shared more about my creative process and the healing it had facilitated, I watched the tension in the room begin to ease. People nodded, some wiped away tears, others sat forward with growing interest. In this workshop, I concluded, we'll use photography not just as an artistic medium but as a tool for transformation. We'll learn to see our wounds differently, not as defects that diminish our worth, but as evidence of our capacity to heal, to grow, to become more authentically ourselves. By the end of that first session, after participants had shared their reasons for joining the workshop and begun experimenting with the cameras I had provided, I knew that something special was developing in that room. A space where people felt safe to be vulnerable, to acknowledge pain without being defined by it, to begin reimagining their own stories. As I packed up my materials that evening, one of the participants, a woman in her 50s named Eleanor, who had shared briefly about her divorce after 30 years of marriage, approached me. "I just wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "When you talked about being called too damaged to love, it was like hearing my own experience put into words." Her eyes, tired but determined, held mine. "My husband left me for his administrative assistant last year, said he needed someone less complicated at this stage of his life." She gave a small, sad laugh. 30 years, 2 children, supporting him through medical school and building his practice, and in the end, I was just too complicated. I felt a surge of empathy for this woman whose story echoed my own in some ways, though the decades invested made her loss seem even more profound. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," I said, meaning it deeply. "That kind of rejection is particularly painful because it strikes at our core sense of worthiness." She nodded. "Exactly. But hearing you talk tonight, seeing your work," her gesture encompassed the photographs on the wall, "it gives me hope that maybe my complications, my damage, whatever you want to call it, maybe those things aren't flaws at all." "They're not," I assured her. "They're the evidence of a life fully lived, of a heart that has loved deeply enough to be broken." As Eleanor left, promising to return with her first photographic attempts next week, I felt a profound sense of purpose settle over me. This, helping others reframe their pain as I had relearned to reframe mine, felt like the completion of a circle. The ultimate transformation of James's cruel words into something healing and generative not just for me, but for others. I texted Ryan on my way home. "First workshop went amazingly well. I think this is what I'm meant to be doing." His reply came quickly, "Of course it is. You're turning your deepest wound into a gift for others. That's the definition of healing." As the weeks progressed, the workshop participants began creating remarkable work, images that captured their pain, their healing process, their emerging sense of wholeness. Eleanor photographed the empty side of her bed, then gradually transformed the series to show that space filled with books, her gardening plans, eventually a small dog she adopted. A young man named Miguel created powerful images of his prosthetic leg, moving from stark medical documentation to artistic compositions that celebrated its mechanical beauty and the freedom it gave him. A middle-aged woman named Diane, who had survived breast cancer, created a haunting series of her post-mastectomy body, gradually incorporating elements of light and growth. Each week, I was moved by their courage, their willingness to use the camera to confront and transform their relationships with their wounded places. And each week I found myself growing as well, becoming more confident in my ability to guide others through this process, more comfortable with my own role as someone whose damage had become a doorway to deeper purpose. Midway through the workshop series, I began feeling unusually tired, with occasional waves of nausea in the mornings. At first, I attributed it to the emotional intensity of the workshops combined with my regular teaching and artistic commitments. But after the third morning of rushing to the bathroom shortly after waking, Ryan gave me a meaningful look. "Kate," he said gently as I returned to bed, pale and shaky. "Do you think maybe we should get a pregnancy test?" The possibility hit me with a mixture of hope and terror. We had been trying for a few months, but I had been so busy with the workshops that I hadn't been tracking my cycle as carefully as before. It could be, I admitted, calculating dates in my head. "I'm about a week late, but with everything going on, I didn't really notice." Ryan's face lit up with cautious excitement. "Should I go get a test? Or we could stop at the pharmacy on the way to your studio later." The eagerness in his voice made my heart swell even as anxiety fluttered in my chest. If I was pregnant, everything would change. There would be no going back, no way to ensure I wouldn't somehow pass on my damage to an innocent child. "Let's get one on the way to the studio," I said, pushing through the fear. Because if there was one thing I had learned in my journey from James's kitchen to this moment, it was that growth happens on the other side of fear, not in its avoidance. The test was positive. 2 pink lines appeared so quickly and decisively that there was no room for doubt. I was pregnant. "Oh my God," I whispered, staring at the plastic stick in our bathroom. "Ryan," he burst in from where he'd been pacing in our bedroom, his face a question. "We're having a baby," I said, my voice catching on a laugh or a sob. I wasn't sure which. His expression transformed into pure joy as he swept me into his arms, spinning me around in our small bathroom. "We're having a baby," he echoed, his voice cracking with emotion. As he set me down, keeping his arms wrapped around me, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. "I'm scared," I admitted, burying my face against his chest. "What if—" "Shh," he soothed, stroking my hair. "It's okay to be scared. I'm a little scared too. But Kate, you are going to be an amazing mother." "You don't know that," I whispered, voicing my deepest fear. "What if all my issues, all my damage? What if it makes me a terrible parent?" Ryan pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his expression serious now. "Listen to me. Your capacity for empathy, your resilience, your creative approach to healing, these are gifts you'll bring to parenting, not liabilities." His hands came up to frame my face. "Our child will learn from you that it's okay to feel deeply, to struggle sometimes, to need support. They'll learn that healing is possible, that authenticity matters more than perfection, that love can encompass all of who they are." His words washed over me like a blessing, helping to quiet the voice of doubt that still sometimes whispered in James's cadences. Ryan was right. The very experiences that James had labeled as damage had given me insights and capacities that would serve me as a mother. "We're having a baby," I repeated, this time with more wonder than fear. "We're going to be parents." "Yes, we are," Ryan affirmed, kissing me softly. "And it's going to be the greatest adventure yet." That evening, as I led my workshop participants through an exercise in finding beauty in unexpected places, I carried my secret like a small flame inside me, a new life growing, a new chapter beginning, a new dimension of healing unfolding. Eleanor noticed something different about me. "You're glowing tonight, Kate," she commented as we reviewed her latest photographs. "Something good happen?" I smiled, not ready to share my news yet, but unable to completely contain my joy. "Just feeling grateful for where life has taken me," I said, "for how wounds can become doorways if we're brave enough to walk through them." She nodded knowingly. "I'm starting to understand that myself," she said, pointing to her latest photograph, a self-portrait where she stood in her garden, face tilted toward the sun, surrounded by new growth. "6 months ago I thought my life was over. Now I'm beginning to see it was just beginning again." As the workshop series progressed toward its conclusion, plans for the exhibition of participants' work began to take shape. The community center had offered their main gallery space for a month-long show, and Meridian's sponsorship covered professional framing and promotion. James, true to his word, had remained hands-off regarding the creative direction, though he checked in periodically with logistical support and updates on marketing efforts. At 12 weeks pregnant, with the first trimester nearly behind me and the worst of the morning sickness subsiding, Ryan and I decided it was time to share our news more widely. We told our families first, his parents reacting with unabashed delight, my sister immediately making plans to visit more frequently once the baby arrived. Friends responded with joy and offers of hand-me-down baby equipment. My therapist, Dr. Chen, received the news with a warm smile and an observation that made me tear up. This is such beautiful evidence of how far you've come in trusting your worthiness to give and receive love. The only person I hesitated to tell was James, though our professional interactions regarding the workshop sponsorship had remained cordial and appropriate. It wasn't that I owed him this information, but rather that I felt a strange need for closure, for him to know definitively that his assessment of me had been completely, utterly wrong. The opportunity came unexpectedly during a planning meeting for the exhibition. James had stopped by the community center to discuss the opening night reception that Meridian would be hosting. As we reviewed the guest list and catering options, he commented on some recent photos I'd posted to my professional social media. "Your new work has such a different quality to it," he observed. "There's a softness that wasn't there before. A new perspective." I smiled, recognizing the opening. "Life changes tend to influence artistic expression," I said, "and I'm going through a pretty significant one right now." He looked at me quizzically. "Oh? I'm pregnant," I said simply. "Due in early November." Something flickered across his face, surprise certainly, but also something deeper. A recognition perhaps of all the alternate futures that had evaporated the moment he had declared me too damaged to love. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That's wonderful news, Kate. Congratulations to you and Ryan." "Thank you," I replied, feeling no triumph or vindication, just a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, living the life I was meant to live. "You'll be a remarkable mother," he added with a sincerity that surprised me. "Your capacity for empathy and transformation. Any child would be fortunate to have that influence." His words, so different from the dismissive judgment he had once passed on my emotional complexity, felt like the final page of a chapter closing. There was no need for further reckoning between us. No need to point out the irony that the woman he had deemed too damaged was now creating a family with a man who valued her completely. James's acknowledgement of my maternal potential was, in its way, the most complete retraction of his previous assessment. "That means a lot," I said simply. "Thank you." We returned to discussing exhibition details, but something had shifted, a final release of whatever residual tension had existed between us. We were just two professionals now, collaborating on a project that mattered to both of us for different but compatible reasons. The night of the exhibition opening arrived with a flurry of last-minute preparations. At 16 weeks pregnant, I was beginning to show, my slight baby bump visible in the fitted black dress I had chosen for the event. Ryan, handsome in a blue button-down shirt that matched his eyes, stayed close by my side as we welcomed early arrivals. "Nervous?" he asked quietly as we watched the gallery space begin to fill with people. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly proud. Of them, of what they've created." The exhibition, titled Visible Repairs, Journeys of Transformation, featured work from all 12 workshop participants. Each had selected 3 to 5 images that documented their path from brokenness toward healing, with brief artist statements explaining their process. The walls of the Community Center Gallery, usually home to more conventional art, now displayed raw, powerful visual testimonies of human resilience. Eleanor's series showed her evolution from documenting the empty spaces in her life after divorce to filling those spaces with new purpose and joy. Miguel's photographs of his prosthetic leg progressed from clinical documentation to artistic celebration. Diane's post-mastectomy portraits moved from stark black and white to increasingly colorful, life-affirming images. Each series told a story of transformation, of damage becoming a doorway to new understanding. My own work was displayed in a small section, not as the focus, but as context for the workshop's approach. My self-portrait with honorable scars held a central position, surrounded by newer pieces that subtly reflected my evolving perspective as an expectant mother. The gallery filled quickly with friends and family of the participants, community members, local art supporters, and Meridian representatives. James arrived with several colleagues, looking polished in a tailored suit but more relaxed than I remembered from our relationship days, less concerned with projecting perfection, more authentically present. At 7 o'clock, the community center director called for attention to formally open the exhibition. After brief welcoming remarks, she invited me to speak about the workshop and the creative journeys represented on the walls. Standing before the gathered crowd, one hand unconsciously resting on my small baby bump, I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. From the woman shattered by rejection in James's kitchen to this moment of professional fulfillment and personal joy, the journey had been both longer and shorter than I could have imagined. Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate these remarkable artists and their courageous work, I began. The Visible Repairs workshop began with a simple premise that our wounds and our healing can become sources of beauty and meaning when we learn to see them differently. As I spoke about the workshop process and the transformations I had witnessed, I found my gaze moving across the room, to Ryan, whose proud smile gave me strength, to Eleanor and the other participants, standing a little taller as their work was acknowledged, to James, listening attentively with an expression of genuine respect. In Japanese aesthetics, there's a concept called wabi-sabi that celebrates imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness, I continued, and a practice called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, highlighting rather than hiding the damage. I gestured to the photographs surrounding us. What you see on these walls is a kind of human kintsugi, lives that have been broken and repaired in ways that add to their beauty and value rather than diminishing them. My hand came to rest again on my growing belly, the new life within me a testament to my own healing, my own reconstruction. When we learn to see our breaks and repairs as part of our beauty rather than flaws to be hidden, we open ourselves to deeper authenticity and connection. As I concluded my remarks and invited everyone to enjoy the exhibition, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional accomplishment. This work, helping others transform their pain into meaning, their wounds into wisdom, was the ultimate reclamation of the label James had once applied to me. Too damaged to love? Number experienced enough to guide others through their own healing journeys, resilient enough to create new life from the ashes of rejection, whole enough to embrace all aspects of myself, the breaks, the repairs, the ongoing restoration. The evening flowed beautifully, with participants proudly explaining their work to visitors, sales of prints benefiting both the artists and future workshop scholarships, and abundant congratulations for both the exhibition and my pregnancy. Near the end of the night, as the crowd was beginning to thin, James approached me where I stood talking with Ryan and Eleanor. "Kate, Ryan." He greeted us with a genuine smile, then turned to Eleanor. "And you must be Eleanor. Your photography is extraordinary, particularly the series on reclaiming space. Very powerful." Eleanor thanked him, clearly pleased by the recognition, before excusing herself to speak with another guest. "The exhibition is a remarkable achievement," James said once she had gone. Not just artistically, but he hesitated, searching for words. Humanly, I guess. The transformations are so evident both in the images and in the artists themselves. "That's all Kate," Ryan said, his arm slipping around my waist with natural affection. "She has this gift for helping people see themselves differently, for creating space where healing can happen." James nodded, his gaze meeting mine with an openness that would have been impossible during our relationship. "I know," he said quietly. "I've experienced it myself, though not until it was too late for us." The acknowledgement hung in the air between us, simple, honest, without agenda. James wasn't asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. He was simply stating a truth he had come to recognize. "It wasn't too late for you, though," I observed. "Just too late for us. And that's okay. We're both where we need to be now." "We are," he agreed, his glance taking in Ryan, my baby bump, the successful exhibition surrounding us. "I'm genuinely happy for you, Kate, for all of this." As he moved away to join his colleagues, Ryan squeezed my waist gently. "You okay?" I leaned into his solid warmth, feeling the complete rightness of where life had brought me. "More than okay," I assured him. "I feel complete, like a circle has closed." Later that night, as Ryan and I prepared for bed in the quiet of our home, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led me from devastation to fulfillment. If James hadn't spoken those cruel words, "too damaged to love," would I have found the courage to rebuild myself so completely? Would I have discovered my artistic voice, my capacity to guide others through transformation, my ability to love and be loved without reservation? "Penny for your thoughts?" Ryan said, catching me staring thoughtfully at my reflection as I removed my earrings. I turned to him, this man who had seen value in my complexity when another had seen only liability. "I was just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we're willing to walk through the pain rather than around it." He came to stand behind me, his hands gently resting on my shoulders. Thinking about James? I nodded, no longer needing to hide or apologize for the significance of that relationship in my journey. If he hadn't broken me open with those words, I might never have discovered what was waiting on the other side of that breaking. "Which was?" Ryan prompted, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "This life," I said simply, my hands coming up to cover his. "You. Our baby. My work. The woman I've become." Ryan turned me to face him, his expression serious and tender. "For what it's worth, I don't think you were ever too damaged to love, Kate. I think you were always exactly as you needed to be, a whole, complex, beautiful human being in progress, just like the rest of us." His hand came to rest on my growing belly, where our child, the ultimate refutation of James's judgment, was developing. "And our baby is the luckiest kid in the world to have you as their mother. Someone who knows that wounds can heal, that breaks can be repaired with gold, that damage isn't a destiny but a doorway." As he held me close, our child between us, I felt the full circle of my journey complete itself. From a woman shattered by the pronouncement that she was too damaged to love, to a woman creating new life with a man who loved her completely, not despite her complications, but because of the depth and wisdom they had given her. This, I realized, was the most perfect revenge imaginable. Not that James was miserable, which he didn't seem to be, or that I had somehow shown him what he had lost, but that his cruel words, intended to explain why I wasn't worthy of his love, had instead launched me on a path to discovering just how worthy I had been all along, and finding someone who recognized that worth without qualification or condition. In the months that followed the exhibition, life continued to unfold with the kind of richness I had once thought beyond my reach. My pregnancy progressed smoothly, each ultrasound and checkup confirming that the little life inside me was developing exactly as it should. Ryan and I converted our home office into a nursery, painting the walls a soft green and filling the bookshelves with stories we couldn't wait to read to our child. The success of the visible repairs workshop led to requests for additional sessions, and with Meridian's continued sponsorship, I was able to offer the program quarterly. Each new group brought different wounds, different stories, different journeys of transformation, and each reinforced my conviction that our breaks and repairs are not defects, but rather the most interesting parts of who we are. James and I maintained a cordial professional relationship through Meridian's ongoing sponsorship, the raw edges of our past gradually smoothing into something that resembled mutual respect. I heard through mutual connections that he had begun dating a grief counselor he met through a volunteer program, a woman, by all accounts, who encouraged rather than feared emotional depth. I found myself genuinely hoping he had found someone who could help him continue his own healing journey. As my due date approached, I felt the expected anxieties of any first-time mother, but they were normal concerns about labor and newborn care, not the existential doubt about my worthiness that might once have plagued me. Dr. Chen, who had continued to be an important support throughout my pregnancy, observed in one of our sessions that my relationship with my unborn child was already demonstrating how far I had come. "You've never once questioned whether you deserve this baby or this happiness," she noted. "That's significant progress from the woman who first came to me believing she might be too damaged to be loved." "I don't feel damaged anymore," I realized as I spoke the words. "I feel experienced, tested, strengthened by what I've been through rather than diminished by it." She smiled. "Exactly. That's what healing looks like, not an erasure of wounds, but a transformation of how we carry them." Our daughter, Lily Eleanor Bennett, was born on a crisp November morning after 20 hours of labor that tested every ounce of my strength and Ryan's steadfast support. When the doctor finally placed her on my chest, tiny, red-faced, perfectly imperfect, I felt a love so vast and encompassing that it seemed impossible my heart could contain it. "Hello, little one," I whispered, as Ryan leaned close, his tears falling onto my shoulder. "Welcome to the world." Looking into her unfocused blue eyes, I made a silent promise. She would never doubt her worthiness of love. She would grow up understanding that her complications, her struggles, her unique sensitivities were not flaws, but facets of her humanity. She would know, from her earliest awareness, that there was no such thing as too damaged to love, only different ways of loving, different capacities for connection, all of them valid and valuable. In the sleepless, wonder-filled weeks that followed Lily's birth, I discovered new dimensions of both strength and vulnerability within myself. The exhaustion of newborn care tested my resilience. The hormonal fluctuations brought emotional waves that reminded me of the anxiety I had once struggled to manage. The profound responsibility of nurturing this new life sometimes overwhelmed me with its magnitude. But these challenges didn't feel like evidence of damage or deficiency. They felt like the natural terrain of new motherhood. Difficult, yes, but navigable with support, patience, and self-compassion. Ryan proved to be the partner I had always known he would be, sharing night feedings, encouraging me to rest when possible, stepping in when I needed a break, and constantly reminding me of my strength when I doubted it. "You're amazing," he would say, watching me nurse Lily in the dim light of early morning. "Look what your body created. Look what your love is nurturing." As Lily grew from newborn to infant, I began to see in her the same emotional sensitivity that had been labeled as damage in me. She felt things deeply, reacted intensely to changes in her environment, needed extra soothing when overwhelmed. But instead of seeing these traits as liabilities, Ryan and I recognized them as the early signs of an empathetic, perceptive spirit, qualities to be understood and guided rather than suppressed or criticized. When Lily was 6 months old, I received an unexpected email from Eleanor, the workshop participant whose journey from post-divorce devastation to reclaimed joy had been so powerful. "Dear Kate," she wrote, "I wanted to share some news that I think will make you smile. I've been accepted to a master's program in art therapy starting this fall. Your workshop changed the direction of my life in ways I'm still discovering, and I want to be able to offer others the same gift of transformation that you gave me." She continued, "There's a line I came across recently that made me think of you and the workshop. The wound is the place where the light enters you. That's what you helped me see, that my brokenness wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of a more authentic chapter." As I read her words with Lily sleeping peacefully against my chest, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This, the ripple effect of healing spreading outward from my own transformation to touch other lives, was the ultimate vindication of the journey I had traveled since that devastating day in James's kitchen. The idea that had germinated during my first workshop series began to take clearer shape in my mind, a book that would combine photography and personal narrative to explore the concept of visible repairs, of damage becoming doorways to greater wholeness. I began writing in the quiet moments while Lily napped, recording both my own journey and the stories of workshop participants who had given permission to share their transformations. As Lily approached her first birthday, I received another unexpected communication, an invitation to speak at a conference on therapeutic arts practices. The email mentioned that my work with the Visible Repairs workshop had come highly recommended by several sources, including James Harrington at Meridian Corporation. The conference was scheduled for the spring, which would give me time to prepare while balancing motherhood and my ongoing workshops. When I mentioned it to Ryan, his immediate response was characteristic of his unfailing support. "You have to do it. Your approach is unique and powerful, and more people need to hear about it. But it would mean being away from you and Lily for 3 days." I worried, the separation already tugging at my heart even in anticipation. "We'll manage," he assured me. "Maybe we can even come with you for part of the time. Lily would love a little adventure with her dad while Mom is being a rock star presenter." His confidence in me, his willingness to adjust our family life to accommodate my professional growth, these were daily reminders of how different this relationship was from what I had known with James, where my needs and aspirations had always seemed secondary, complications to be minimized rather than celebrated. The day of Lily's first birthday party dawned bright and clear, our small backyard decorated with balloons and streamers. We had invited a small group of friends and family to celebrate, my sister and her family who had flown in for the occasion, Ryan's parents, Dana and her now husband Marcus, a few other close friends, and several families we had met through a parent-baby class. To my surprise, among the RSVPs was one from James, who had remained professionally connected through Meridian's sponsorship of my workshops, but had never been included in our personal celebrations. After discussing it with Ryan, I decided to welcome his attendance, a gesture that felt appropriate given how our paths had diverged and reconnected in unexpected ways. The party was joyful chaos. Lily, adorable in a pale yellow dress, more interested in the wrapping paper than the gifts, her face comically dismayed at her first taste of birthday cake. Ryan's parents took countless photos. My sister helped manage the other children. Dana and Marcus announced they were expecting their first child, adding another layer of celebration to the day. James arrived midway through the party, somewhat awkward but carrying a beautifully wrapped gift. He had brought a date, the grief counselor I had heard about, a warm-eyed woman named Claire who immediately connected with several of the other guests. Watching him interact with our friends and family, I was struck by how much he had changed from the man who had once dismissed me as too damaged to love. There was a humility to him now, a willingness to engage authentically rather than maintaining the perfect facade he had once prioritized above all else. When he approached me where I stood watching Lily explore a new toy with my niece, his smile was genuine if slightly tentative. "She's beautiful, Kate," he said, nodding toward my daughter. "She has your eyes. And hopefully Ryan's patience," I replied with a laugh. "She's a determined little soul." "That's definitely your influence," he observed, and there was no criticism in his tone, only appreciation. We chatted easily about the upcoming conference where I would be speaking, Meridian's continued commitment to arts programming, and his relationship with Claire, which seemed to be nurturing positive growth for them both. As our conversation drew to a natural close, he hesitated, then said quietly, "I hope you know how wrong I was. About you. About what makes someone worthy of love." I looked across the yard to where Ryan was holding Lily high above his head, her delighted giggles carrying on the breeze, surrounded by people who had chosen to be part of our lives with all their complications and joys. "I do know that," I said, with no trace of bitterness or vindication, just the calm certainty of someone who has found her truth. "But thank you for saying it anyway. Your daughter is lucky," he added, "to grow up with parents who understand that vulnerability is strength, not weakness." As he moved away to rejoin Claire, I felt the final thread of my old pain dissolve completely. James's words, "too damaged to love," had once defined me, limited me, shattered my sense of self. Now they were just a historical footnote in a life rich with love, purpose, and authentic connection. That evening, after the guests had departed and Lily was asleep in her crib, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Ryan and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine, enjoying the peaceful aftermath. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, echoing his familiar phrase as he noticed my contemplative expression. I turned to him, this man who had seen in me not damage but depth, not complications but richness, not liabilities but gifts. "I was thinking about how far I've come," I said honestly, "from believing I was too damaged to love to knowing that the very things James saw as damage were actually my greatest strengths." Ryan reached for my hand, his thumb tracing familiar patterns on my palm. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think there's no such thing as being too damaged to love. There are only people willing to do the work of loving authentically and people who aren't." As we sat together in the gentle evening light, our daughter sleeping peacefully inside the home we had created together, I felt the completeness of my journey from brokenness to wholeness. The revenge I had once unconsciously sought, proving James wrong about my lovability, had been accomplished not through his suffering, but through my flourishing. He had said I was too damaged to love, but life had revealed a different truth, that my capacity for love, deep, authentic, transformative love, had never been the problem. It had been my greatest gift all along, waiting for the right person to recognize and receive it. And in that recognition, in that receiving, I had found not just vindication, but something far more valuable, the understanding that our wounds, our breaks, our so-called damage are not obstacles to being loved. They are invitations to a deeper, more authentic love than we ever imagined possible. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above our little family home, I rested my head on Ryan's shoulder, profoundly grateful for the painful words that had set me on this path to true healing, for the broken places that had let in more light, and for the man beside me who had taught me that I was never too damaged to love, just waiting for the right kind of love to find me.